I'm a debtor in a very special way tonight. When I came, Ron, I had my flash drive and we plugged it into the computer and there was nothing on it, which isn't a good thing when you're going to use PowerPoint. And I'm a debtor now to Karen Owen, who sat back there and typed the material on it for me, and so we have PowerPoint for tonight's lesson. So if you see Karen, and I don't know if she's in here or if she thought or knew I was preaching and took off. Is she around somewhere? But everybody give her a thank you before you leave tonight. I don't think she attends here. I think she attends at Hartsville, but she's one of the speakers to the ladies tomorrow. I'm a debtor tonight to Ronnie Hayes. He called me out of the blue one day and said, we're going to have a workshop on evangelism. What do you think? I said, it's 2,000 years past due. Ron, I remember when we first came into the church, Dorothy and I, back in the 60s, everybody talked about evangelism, everybody did it. That stopped somewhere in the 70s, and it hasn't continued. It has not continued, brothers and sisters. So I'm going to ask you to do something tonight. I'm an old man now. I don't have very many years left, I don't guess, in this world. But I'm watching the Church of Christ be stuck in the mud, as David talked to us a while ago. And it can't seem to get out. So I'm going to ask you to do something tonight. When this sermon's over, I want you to move. I want you to move literally and spiritually. And I'm hoping that everyone in this auditorium tonight will be up front when we get done. And asking God to forgive us and to move us out of these pews, out into the streets. Let's see if we can do it tonight and find out why we should be doing it. If you'll notice on the overhead, there's a verse there from Ephesians 6, growing for evangelism. Why that verse? It says, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Brothers and sisters, there's a work that needs to be done that requires very strong people. The problem is, 92% of the members of the church are not doing personal work. 92%. Personal work is not optional. It's demanded of God for all of us. The excuse often is, I don't know how to do it. Well, then your challenge would be to find out. Because God is expecting all of us to be personal workers. In every congregation of God's people, we have three groups. We have an outer fringe group, which makes up about what we call delinquent members. And we'll talk about this group in a moment. We have a mainstream group. This mainstream group is 92% of the church. There is a hardcore, and I want you tonight to think seriously about becoming a hardcore Christian. To move out of the mainstream and to become again what God requires of all of his children. We need to be those who talk to others about Jesus. In order to figure out where I am, we need to look at some growth indicators. The Apostle Paul demanded that we examine ourselves whether we were in the faith. Where ourselves would know whether we're in the faith unless we were reprobate, 2 Corinthians 13:5. And I thought about these indicators in my own life. What is it I like to talk about the most? Alabama football or the Lord Jesus Christ? That's important when it comes to my spiritual growth. What's my Bible knowledge? How much do I really know about the Bible? It's interesting, Ronnie, we used to give a test to incoming students at the Bible School of Preaching to see whether or not they could become a student. It was a 100-question Bible test. So many couldn't pass it, we couldn't get any students. So we had to quit giving the test. What is my Bible knowledge? What's my attendance like at all services of the Lord's church? I have an idea that not every member of the Adamsville Church of Christ is here tonight. And I know I've never held a gospel meeting where everybody in that local congregation attended. And so what's my attendance like? What about my giving? What's that like? Am I a donator or a giver? Or do I just tip the preacher when I think the sermon was good? What's my giving like? What about my involvement? Sometimes people get involved and they drop out, then they get involved and they drop out. But am I constant? Am I consistent? Then I thought about the fact, have I ever won a soul for the Lord? On my own, by myself, because of my effort? Well, I gave at the church and the preacher won one. That's great. That's wonderful. But what about me? Have I ever taught someone and he or she became a Christian? And what's my ethic like? That's very important. Is it situational or is it consistent and biblical? Let's look first tonight at what I call the outer fringe group. The outer fringe group. Ronnie, you probably met this fellow. He calls you the pastor. He doesn't know the difference between a preacher and an elder, and so he calls you the pastor. And he certainly doesn't like to examine himself. That's the last thing he wants to do. This guy's life is not Christ-like. I'll tell you when you see him at church is on Christmas and Easter, maybe. You might see him twice a year. He has little Bible knowledge, as I said, and he thinks I'm the pastor or something like that, when in fact I'm just an evangelist. The pastors are the elders. But he doesn't know that. He doesn't know that the last book in the Bible is not resolution. He thinks that's what it is. It's revelation. And he doesn't know that doesn't have an S, does he, Devin? His Bible knowledge is slipping. He may attend twice a year, but he certainly does not know how to give. I'll never forget the first time I saw a man actually put $20 in a plate. That surprised me. I was in awe of that, because the denomination in which I was involved, if you gave 50 cents, that was a lot, David. But this man actually put $20 in the plate, and it surprised me when I came into the church and saw that. But I've had to learn how to give. I found out that this fellow doesn't give very much. I didn't put that forward. He's not involved at all. In fact, he takes up the time of the church because we have to go visit him, trying to get him back. And we're going to talk about how to do that in the morning, these delinquents. Maybe there's another way we can do that. But he's not involved, and here's the sad part, folks. He's not saving his own soul. Certainly not his family's, or his friends, or his fellow workers, or anyone like that. Well, there's nobody here tonight in that group. Not one of you. Here's where we all are most of the time. We call this the mainstream group. Sometimes when we visit them, we can get them to talk about the Bible, and oftentimes they will talk about it on Sunday morning in Bible class. Here's the problem with that. It may be the only time in the week when they do that, is Sunday morning in Bible class. That's seriously a problem. Did you realize that if you went to first grade the way you go to Sunday school, it would take you 11 years to get through the first grade? If those are the only hours you went during the week? About an hour and a half a week. Take you 11 years to get through the first grade. So we need to be doing some study on our own. But 70% of our brothers and sisters cannot give the plan of salvation if they have to give you the book, chapter, and verse for it. And that's the sad thing. Brother Guy in Woods actually said that at the open forum at Freed Hardeman one year. And I've taken that statistic. It may be higher than that, I don't know. Hope it's lower. This person measures his spirituality, however, by the way he attends. Have you ever heard it said of someone, he's there every time the door is opened? So what? Now, I don't mean to be hard by that or mean, but that's not the way to measure my spirituality. And I'm going to show you why in just a moment. But they do attend, and that's a good thing, but there should be something coming out of that attendance. There should be something happening, and it isn't, and this is the problem. That's why we're having the workshop. There's a problem here. The giving is inconsistent, and often it's not planned. Brothers and sisters, we don't give from the net income if we are Christians. We give from the gross income if we are Christians. God wants the first fruit if we're Christians, not the net, not what's left over after I've paid everything else. God wants the first fruit, but this person hasn't learned that, and the giving is often inconsistent because of that, because it's not planned. My budget has God at the top. Whatever else is left is for other things. And so it has to be consistent. Also, it's the case that our mainstream brothers and sisters, who are wonderful people, they are good family folks, usually good husbands and fathers, but they've never taught a soul how to be a Christian. Never sat one-on-one with a person and told him what to do to be saved. It's never happened. And so we're putting them in the mainstream. And here's another problem. Sometimes their ethic is situational. They can tell some things and watch some things and read some things sometimes that Christians ought not to tell, watch, and read. And so they're situational in their ethic. But here's where I want everyone to move tonight. Here's where we need to be, or we're never going to help the church grow. Here's what's got to happen, brothers and sisters. And it has to happen very quickly because the world is so outpopulating us. I thought about this the other day. If we had the same number of evangelists in this country per capita as the Church of Christ sends out missionaries to the whole world, there would be 7 evangelists in this country, and that's it. We have approximately 3 million members in this country sending out 400 missionaries. Why does it take 1,200 of us to send out 1 missionary? Ask yourself that question, brothers and sisters. You know how many men it should take to send out a missionary? 10. Because if every one of those men tithed, and I know that's a nasty word in the church, but if every one of those men gave 10%, what would the missionary have? What's 10 times 10%? But it's for some reason it takes 1,200 of us to send out 1 missionary. We need to change that somehow. Starts up here, I think. Hardcore Christian loves to talk about the Bible. I wish you folks had known Hobart Hayes. I don't know if he was related to you or not, Ron. His brother was a deacon when I preached at Gregg. Hobart Hayes wrote me a definition of the Bible in his own hand. He had the most beautiful handwriting of every gentleman I've ever seen. He lived in a place called Parsons, Tennessee, and I would visit him. He had a tremendous problem with arthritis, but he wrote that thing for me. I've got it on the wall in my office. But when you were with Hobart, you talked about the Bible. From the time you walked in the house until you left, you talked about the Bible. He was a teacher. Because he knew so much about the Bible, he was a teacher. Our hardcore people are our teachers. About 8% of most churches. The attendants, they don't just come on Sunday and Wednesday. They're there when everything's going on. Why? Attitude's different. Their giving is planned and very generous. Generous. I mean generous. There's something else about these folks. They're always willing to work. Ron, you know that if you want to get something done, you give it to a person that's already working because you know they're going to. These are our soul winners. Why is it that only 8% of the church is in that group? I don't know. I wish I did. These are the folks that have actually sat down and studied with someone, and that person became a Christian. Or at least they sat down and tried to teach the person. Their ethic is biblical. They would never do or say or dress in such a way as to bring shame on the Lord's church. I want to invite your attention tonight to the 25th chapter of Matthew. The 25th chapter of Matthew. I think sometimes this chapter is misunderstood. Therefore, it's mistaught. There are 3 studies by the Lord here about members of the church. It's interesting how he forms these studies. In the first place, he talks about 5 wise virgins. And then he mentions 5 foolish virgins in the first few chapters there. And he said, first 4 verses, and he says, the kingdom's like these 10 virgins. That's what it's like. In the church, we've got half wise and half foolish. Why is that? Well, the wise ones took their sanctification, their salvation, personally. They filled their own lamps with their own oil. They took it personally. They got involved because they knew they had a personal relationship with their bridegroom, and they were going to be ready when he came, and they were going to be able to meet him, whether it was dark or not. They were ready, and they stayed that way. The foolish lived their lives any old way they wanted, did what they wanted, and when the bridegroom came and it was dark, they couldn't find him. They needed some oil in their lamps, and they couldn't get to him, and by the time they got there, the Bible says the door was shut. And they said, "Open it up." And he said, "I don't know you." I think that the phrase personal relationship isn't taught enough in the Lord's church. I'm not sure about that, but I think that. There are things as we travel this earth-shifting sand that transcend all the reason of man. But the things that matter the most in this world can never be held in our hands. I believe in a hill called Mount Calvary. I'll believe whatever the cost. And when life has surrendered and time is no more, I'll still cling to that old rugged cross. It's personal with me. And everybody I meet, I want them to understand. I want to tell you about somebody that I know, and he's great, and he can save you. Have you ever thought about how interesting it is to have a Bible study in your home? No, sir. Well, how would you answer the question, will the majority go to heaven? Well, I guess they would. You know, I really don't care how they answer that. Say yes, no, or indifferent. I'll say, would you like to confirm your answer with the Bible? Yes, sir. Tonight or tomorrow night? Well, tomorrow night. 7 or 7:30. It's that easy, folks. It's that easy to get a Bible study. But you have to be careful not to answer their question. Just doesn't matter what they say. Will the majority go to heaven? I don't know. Well, would you like to confirm your answer with the Bible? Yes, sir. Tonight or tomorrow night. Always give them a choice between something and something. Why? I want them to be ready with oil in their own lamps. I don't want to have any foolish virgins here meeting the Lord and not being able to go in through the door. Then he talks about a man traveling into a far country, verse 14. And this gentleman calls unto him his servants and gives them his goods. Those goods don't belong to the men. They belong to the master. And he said, you fellows take care of them. Now he gave one fellow 5 pieces of money, talents. This thing is mistaught to say God gives us our talents. No, we develop our own abilities. They're not given to us by God. But when he knows what our abilities are, he gives us something we can do. That's the point of the parable. He gave this first fellow 5 pieces of money, talents, bars of gold or silver. He gave the second fellow 2, and one guy only got 1, and he did that. Each man was given according to his own ability. Verse 15, and the fellow leaves, takes his journey. This fellow invests 5 and gets 5 more. Another one invests 2, gets 2 more. One invests, oh no, he didn't either. He took it home, buried it in the backyard, because he had no personal relationship with the one who gave it to him. He didn't know him. He did not know him. He said, you're a hard man. Wrong. And you're going to demand more of me than, no. Take it away from him, you wicked and slothful servant, and give it to the other ones. You know why some folks won't do personal work? Because they are afraid to make a mistake. But brothers and sisters, allow yourself the luxury of making a mistake. I have made plenty. Got married, didn't I? Oh, she's here tonight. I made lots of mistakes. She can tell you that we've been married 50 years plus. Be 51 in September. I tell you what, I've made some mistakes in my lifetime. I've made mistakes doing personal work. Sometimes I stop it too soon. Sometimes I take it too long. But I've got to allow myself that luxury. Why? Because I'm not doing it for Keith. Doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm just a mouthpiece. And my master said, I gave you that, Kieth, and you can do. He gave us the church. When Jesus went back to heaven, do you suppose the angel said to him, what were you doing down there? He said, I was building my church. Well, where is it? He said, I left it in the hands of 11 men on the side of Mount Olivet. 11 men? Yes. What'd you tell them to do? Go into all the world. 11 men into all the world. Yes. Did they do it? Well, they're going to do it. Because when he gives us something, brothers and sisters, and that's the point of this parable, he expects us to do it because it's not impossible to do it. He wouldn't give it to us otherwise. He didn't give us the church and then say it's too hard to evangelize. No. How many of you folks have grandchildren? Could you stay away from me while I'm here? I want to talk about mine. How many of you have a great-grandchild? Not very many. I can talk about Kinsley tonight, can't I? I love to talk about Kinsley. You know why I like to talk about Kinsley? Guess why I like to talk about Kinsley? Oh, she is so cute, John. You ought to see her. I got a picture, 8.5. She's smiling. Oh, man, she is so great. You hold that little thing and she sleeps, doesn't make a sound. That's good for a grandpa. But I don't love my friend enough to talk about him to people. Because he might hold me responsible if I make a mistake. That's what this parable's about. He never gives us anything we can't do. Then there's a judgment scene. Verse 25. Excuse me, verse 31. Strange scene. He's got Christians from all the nations in front of him. And he separates them. Puts the sheep Christians over here and the goat Christians over here. From my viewpoint, on the right and the left. He's not dividing the world from the church here, folks. He doesn't have to do that. That's already divided. But there's a reason he has to divide the church. Because some of these are hardcore, but some of them are mainstream. How do you decide who was what? On the right hand, he said, come in here, you've inherited the kingdom. Verse 34. Look at verse 35. Here's how he decided. He said, you attended 200 times a year, and you went to Bible class, and you brought your Bible, and you prayed a lot, so you're ready. He doesn't mention any of those things in the judgment scene. Because, brothers and sisters, if we don't get past that in measuring our spirituality that way, we're going to be lost. How does he measure the spirituality that allows a person personally related to him to get into the kingdom? He said, I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. See what they're doing? Personal work. Naked, you clothed me. Sick, you visited me. I was in prison, you came unto me. He was in prison. Christians in prison. Wouldn't you be afraid to visit them back then? You could be put to death if they found out you were a Christian. But these folks were not afraid of that. They went anyway. And then they said, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry? Or fed you? Or thirsty and gave you drink? Or when were you ever a stranger and we took you in, or naked and clothed you? They didn't realize, they were so spiritual, they didn't realize that was a big deal. The personal worker never thinks about that as a big deal. That's natural for him. He has to talk about his friend to everybody he meets. He has to. So it's not on you. They didn't say, why didn't you mention our prayer life and our Bible study? Because we have to get past that. What about those folks on the other side? He said, you go away from me. Why? Because they never saw a hungry person, or a thirsty person, or a sick person, or a Christian in prison. And so they didn't do anything about it. The announcements of the sick were made Sunday after Sunday. They never visited the hospital. They got mad at the preacher if he didn't go. They didn't go. On one occasion, he asked the Pharisees, which of you having 100 sheep and one is lost would not leave the 99 and go find the one? Not one of those guys would have done that. And he knew it. I have a hard time sometimes getting what's in my heart inside of my brothers and sisters' minds. So I want to take an example tonight from my master. One time when he was trying to help his disciples understand about their arrogance, he took a little child and set that child in the midst of them. I want to set a little child in our midst tonight to try to give you a hint or a thought or a concept about what it means to be a hardcore Christian. And be motivated the way she had motivation. I first met Kirsty Hudson when she was 3 years old. Kirsty was brought to the services of the Lake Forest Church of Christ in Walls, Mississippi by a neighbor. And after the services, she came up to me and said, "Peacher," 3-year-old, "Peacher, Mommy in hospital. Go see her." Usually they ask. She just said, "Go see her." So Dorothy and I went by the hospital to see Yvonne, and she was there giving birth to Kirsty's little baby sister. About 3 days later, we came by the house, and Kirsty ran out. "The preacher's here, the preacher's here." And she grabbed my hand, and in the house we went. And we went into the kitchen, and she said to her mother, "He's here to talk to you about God." She ran out. I said, "Well, Yvonne, that's a good idea. What do you think?" She said, "Well, we don't have a church," and we got to talking, and we got to study with her. And her first study, Yvonne brought her can of beer and her cigarette. And after we studied for a while, I started to notice she didn't bring the beer. And then she stopped the cigarillos. And she was baptized into Christ. And I was so excited. I said, "Kirsty, we're going to baptize your mama." You know what Kirsty said to me? "You didn't talk to Yvette." I just realized something. That girl is a pest. I'd be sitting in the front pew, and she'd walk up to me and whisper in my ear, "I love you." Well, you can really preach after that. Anyway, Yvette was her 11-year-old sister. So we talked to Yvette, and Yvette was eventually baptized. Meanwhile, Kirsty said, "Are you ever going to talk to me, Ma?" I thought that was her grandmother. It was her great-grandmother. That study lasted 5 years, a hard shell. Eventually, Mima obeyed the gospel. Meanwhile, she led me to her Nana, 2 of her uncles, 2 of her aunts. About that time, I left the congregation at Lake Forest to go to Gregg Avenue. She called me one day. She said, "Brother Keith," "Hey, Kirsty." She was 10 years old at the time, 10 years old. She said, "Hey, this is Sister Kirsty." Kirsty had obeyed the gospel. She was all excited. And she said, "Guess what? Daddy was baptized too." That's great, Kirsty. Kirsty loves softball. Oh, that was her favorite game. When all the other little girls wore shorts, Kirsty wore long breeches, even on hot days. I said, "Kirsty, why do you do that?" And she said, "Well, I'm a Christian." Nobody told her that. There wasn't any rule on it. She just figured it out. She just figured it out. She's sitting in the services at Lake Forest one day, and the song leader there got up and made the most ugly announcement I've ever seen made in the church. He read an ugly letter, said he was leaving the church, and said some ugly things. I've seen the letter. I don't even want to repeat or think about what he said, but that broke Kirsty's heart. That broke her heart. This little girl who never met anyone she thought was not interested in God now is hearing somebody say he's not interested in God. It broke her heart. She said, "Mama, you got to take me to Uncle Mac's bookstore." J. McNutt, had a bookstore at National and Jackson in Memphis. She wanted to go to Brother Mac's bookstore. She wrote a note to the song leader. Got a tract of some kind at that bookstore and stuck the note in the tract and put all in an envelope and put his name on it. Goodman Road in Horn Lake, Mississippi is now 4 lanes. It was 2 at the time. They were coming home from softball practice Thursday evening when they pulled into the Dairy Queen there to get some refreshment. Kirsty got out and her softball rolled out across that 2-lane road, and she ran out to get it, not thinking. The car that killed her dragged her 165 feet before it stopped. When I did her funeral, I used the Spanish phrase, vaya con Dios. Go with God, Kirsty. Somehow God had put an angel in our midst. But she taught me more than anyone that I've ever been around, a little 3-year-old girl, that there's nobody in this world that should ever be thought of as not being interested in God. Even that ugly song leader who came to that funeral service Friday night, and I watched Yvonne hand him that envelope right there next to the casket, and I'm thinking, she being dead yet speaketh. Right out of that casket, she's still doing personal work. Why? Is that such a vision for me? Because I want to be one of those folks, like she was. I want to be a hardcore Christian. I want to love my master so much that you can't stop me from talking about him to anybody, anywhere, at any time. You go into the grocery store this week, you talk to that lady behind the counter and ask her where she's going to church Sunday. You know why we don't have Bible studies? You have not because you ask not. You go into the gas station. I went into a gas station one day and I said, would you be interested in studying the Bible? He said, no, but I think my grandmother would. He called his grandmother. She said, send him over. She was interested. We studied with her. We have to ask. We have to ask wherever we go. You school children, you got any schoolmates sitting next to you, behind you, in front of you? Wrap him on the head and say, have you ever studied the Bible? See what happens. I love to drive into a community and have them tell me, those people in the Church of Christ bothering us all the time. Yes, that's my brothers and sisters. Go get them. And Kirsty's up there going, yeah, go get them. And the Lord's saying, why are you ashamed of me? In order to get through college, I had to sell Collier Encyclopedia. Don't do that. I wasn't a Christian. You have to lie a lot to sell encyclopedia. But I learned something about an offer. They said they had the greatest offer since sliced bread. They were so wrong. We have it. His name is Jesus. Now, how many of you will get out of that mainstream this tonight? Would you rather tell the Lord when you get there, well, I was planning on being hardcore? Or wouldn't you rather tell him tonight? While we stand, while we sing.